Hello world, welcome to Champions Online Freeform Guide for Retiarius, a Gladiator-inspired build. This build is one of the Roman Gladiator classes based on a fisherman theme and one of the few that doesn't require a shield since we don't really have shields in the game. At least not the right kind of shields, and it would look funny to have that wrist-mounted buckler. So, fisherman themed, using a spear, a net, and a backup knife. Don't really love the costume for this. I do have the King Sekhmet, Sellout, whatever his name is, set. I wouldn't recommend it because it's kind of disappointing. There's a lot of graphical errors in it. But there's some other things that would work out for the various loinclothy things. There's some other sets that would be better for that. The heavy weapon set has been updated as far as I know. I don't think it's going to get any drastic changes. It mostly uses skewer since it's kind of the only thrusting style weapon power thing we have. This is absolutely not a leveling build. You can start using it from level 20. Respecking at 20 is pretty cheap. You can do the whatever super stats you want, which would be strength, constitution, and recovery in this case, right from the get-go, but since the main attack is skewer and I don't really want to have a bunch of stupid filler powers, I would say just respec at 20. You can level with cleave. Kind of looks funny if you're using the trident skin, which this is also going to require. The only thing it really requires because it's the only spear type thing that we have. For stats, I just went with the typical enrage build type stats with strength as the primary, constitution secondary, and recovery as your third stat. And then for all the talents, it was just like superhuman for the innate, and then physical conditioning, relentless, bodybuilder, quick recovery, boundless reserves, and amazing stamina. So basically just more of my super stats and then some endurance, because why not? For travel powers, I would go with acrobatics of some sort, and then, I don't know, I guess whatever you want. For the trees, for strength tree, it's just swole for more health, physical, peak for cheaper powers, brutality for the severity, and juggernaut for all that delicious defense from constitution, because pretty much anything we don't put into strength is going to go into constitution and not bother with recovery because you don't really need to. If you like this build and you want to take it to be more powerful, like if you want to get like Justice Gear or one of the Distinguished Gears, which just has a nice set bonus too, you could dump Swole for aggression, which increases the amount of offense you receive from items by 10-20%. And if you have, like, the Justice set has a set bonus of 140 something to offense, which is really, really nice. So I would take aggression if you plan on going with Justice Gear. It's not as good if you're only, like, in Heroics or Mercenary Gear, because it doesn't have very much offense from gear, because it's only from items. It's not offense you get from going with Wardicator, which of course that's what we're going to do. Warden and Vindicator for the other two trees because, I mean, why not abuse it? It's probably the best two trees for almost every build. And Warden, we're just going to go with Fortified Gear, Ruthless, Elusive, because Elusive does actually work with the extra AoE resistance and bosses, even if you're not tanking, which this is a DPS build. So even if you're not tanking, you're probably going to get some splash damage, so it's nice to have a little bit more AoE resistance, and of course the best defense, which is part of that hilarious looping thing where you get tons of offense and defense. And of course the Vindicator tree. I went with aggressive stance because obviously we want the increasing our defense by 20% of our offense value, which will be probably really high, and then merciless for 15% severity. I went with Rush of Battle, which is really nice for things that are not boss fights, although boss fights now tend to have some ads. It depends on the boss, I think. Some bosses do and some bosses don't. But for like general purpose stuff, Rush of Battle is pretty nice. You don't have to take it. It's just the extra 15% healing when you kill an enemy is kind of nice maintenance heal. And then pretty much everything we have is an AoE attack. So I went with Mass Destruction, 2 out of 3 points in that. You could go with something like Offense Expert and just use your active offense a lot more often. There's no point going in Focus Strike, or you could go with Modified Gear. Again, if you use the Justice set, or anything that has a really good offense from gear, then the 20% you get is pretty nice. And Strength Mastery, because we don't have a combo, so there's no point in Warden Mastery. And Vindicator Mastery just sucks it just sucks, period. Powers! So for the Energy Builder, I just went with Bludgeon, because whatever. We shouldn't need to use it that much, but it's there. And of course in Rage, I would go with around 400-ish strength. That's pretty reasonable, and since strength is our primary super stat, it's not terribly hard, even with, mercenary or heroic gear, to get around 400. And that, to me, for a form, is, I would say, a good spot, because when you go over 400 too much, it's just not worth the investment too much. You really have to put a shitload into your stats for that. You could probably do a strength stacking build with this, but I like my Juggernaut, so I usually just dump everything else into Constitution, because why not? Anyway, Endorphin Rush. That's always a nice thing. It's not, amazing for healing, but, it's healing you don't have to do anything for. Then we have Decimate, just a lunge, just to get in there, since we really have absolutely no melee or ranged abilities. It's pretty much all pure melee. Unstoppable, I would say this is the best form for this, because we are going DPS, but Unstoppable has the energy gain mechanic, which is a lot more reliable than Wild Thing, so that's why I picked Recovery. I think in the videos I was using Endurance, which was disappointing, because Wild Thing doesn't just not that great with this build, even though we have Skewer, which does have bleed stacking, it's just not very reliable. Unstoppable and the energy gain mechanic scales with Recovery, so that's why we're going with that. Arc of Ruin, that is going to be our debuff applier, and it's going to be how we build our enrage stacks with the knockdown, since Skewer has no ability to knock down. It also means that building enrage stacks is going to be slower, but you always get to 8 eventually anyway, for the most part, and you do get 20 seconds to reapply Arc of Ruin. We're probably going to apply more than that. I think the crushing debuff from No Quarter is only 12 seconds or so. You can just go ahead and do a couple full charge skewers and then hit Arc of Ruin again. And of course Wildfire is the knockdown. You do get Clinging Flames, which we don't use in this build for anything special. You can get the fire-based healy thing. I forget what it's called, heat something or other. You can use that as a heal. I went with Conviction because it's still the best click heal. For the block replacer, I went with Antagonize. I like Antagonize. It's my favorite looking one. You could pick whatever you want. And of course ranking it up because we have the points for it. Especially for some of the big bosses they have nowadays, having a rank 3 block is really, really nice. You could go with rank 2, but they don't really have anywhere else that we're putting those points, so finally we get to Skewer at level 20, which we're just going to take full ranks. You can go with initiative or follow through. Personally, I like follow through just because, it is weird to have a charge at melee attack, but tap spamming Skewer, I don't know, I don't like the animation for that. So I prefer the longer one. It's only a 1.5 or 2 second charge, which is pretty nice. It's not horrifically long or anything. It doesn't really matter if you go tap spamming or full charging because bleed stack buildup really sucks. That's why I went with Eye of the Storm. I wanted to use Reaper's Embrace, but I really just could never get over 3 stacks of bleed. You could still do that with Reaper's Embrace. You just tap it, and it's like a little rupture of your bleed stacking. It's just, I find it annoying just to try to build the bleed stack. So I went with Eye of the Storm. The knife is a backup weapon, and then in a way it does fit. The animation isn't exactly fitting of a Gladiator. You could just dump it completely if you really hate it, or you could take Reaper's Embrace and just realize you'll probably never get 5 stacks of bleed to rupture, but it should be good enough. Or you could take whatever the Blunt Strike reskin is for single blades and then use the knife skin. Bolas, I took Bolas. We don't have a power that has a net, but we do have a device that has a net. I would rather have a power. If you want, you could pick up the device. I don't know what the cooldown on that is, but there's generally a lot of competition for stuff to go in our device tray, so I went with Bolas and nailed to the ground. It's fairly fitting. It's still a ranged attack. It's still useful. Those flying enemies aren't really easy for us to hit since this is basically a pure melee build and there's absolutely no ranged attacks in here. Let's see. Imbue, I use that as the active offense. It's pretty good, generic, standard active offense. Critical chance and critical severity. You can't really go wrong. Even if you have really good gear, it's still going to be fine. Pure added damage and just extra stats doesn't necessarily scale very well if you have a really powerful character. But crit chance and crit severity are always good choices. They don't get crapped on by diminishing returns. You could use Aggressor if you want to build enrage stacks faster. Wild Thing. I put this higher up. You could put Wild Thing lower in the build, but I was just not terribly excited about it. I wasn't sold on it. I'm still not sold on it after using it. It's really the only energy unlock that would work with this build because the brick sets don't really have anything except for thermal reverberate, maybe. I don't know if that would work. You are applying Clinging Flames with Wildfire's Arc of Ruin. I don't know if that would be any more reliable. I think that Unstoppable and the energy gain from that is probably going to be better than either of them because they have the same issues. Bleed stacks just aren't very good with Skewer, and we don't use Arc of Ruin that much. Unleashed Rage, it does have a good animation for it. It's kind of showy, which makes sense for a gladiator class because that's what they were. And you know, it is kind of the standard for powerful ultimates. And I think it only has like a minute cooldown, so you could use it pretty much all the time. Obviously, it's best when you have full enrage stacks, which you will against bosses most of the time. Unless, of course, they have some stupid thing like Inform Malvenom, you probably lose stacks all the time because there's like cutscene abuse for days. And of course, Masterful Dodge. It's a pretty good power. One of the best active defenses. I would say it's probably the best active defense. It can go in any build. It doesn't have any crazy, obnoxious looking animations for it. It's just you have Masterful Dodge, and it's just really good to have. Character this tanky probably isn't going to need it that often, especially since you're not actually a tank. You could be a decent off tank or main tank for a lot of the content. I mean, you're probably not going to tank anything like the Liberator bot from the ASCII Open Mission event. For gearing, it's mostly about having the right stats. You don't have to have heroic gear. Because this is a strength, constitution, recovery setup, and most anything is going to be patched up just with that. I mean, your stats alone are going to do a lot for your build. Mostly you just want to have around 400 strength and then dump everything else in the constitution. You can do a strength statting build and just dump everything into strength, especially if we have soul, because that'll give you a lot of health. You won't get as much from Juggernaut, but just having constitution as a secondary stat gives you some decent defense from Juggernaut, so it's still fine. And then recovery, you don't really need to invest in recovery. What you'll get from Unstoppable, the energy gain, you don't need to invest a lot into it. If you do have extra recovery, that's fine too. Doesn't really matter. As you upgrade gear, obviously the build just becomes a lot more powerful. You get more defense. You become pretty tanky DPS character, especially once you start getting into set bonuses for the Justice and Distinguished gear. Those work really well with the best defense loop from Warden and Vindicator. Having more strength does absolutely increase your melee damage. It is hit with diminishing returns, but you can still get some pretty high numbers if you really want to go. And you wouldn't even be much of a glass cannon just because you have that constitution and you have Juggernaut. Specific gear choices for the primary offense, you can go with either crit chance or crit severity. Both are good. You should be able to get pretty good severity just from the tree. I like to shoot for around 100% severity. So you can just go with crit chance and then a gambler's, or severity and a gambler's. But I would definitely say gambler's, just so you can have a good 20% crit chance. An impact mod is also good. I would say if you're upgrading to 4-slot gear to get 1 gambler's and 1 impact, you could of course also go with a depleted uranium core, which has the damage penetration, which is also really nice. But if you can't afford one because they are pretty expensive, then like a gambler's and an impact. The impact will of course go with the Wardicator, and it works really nicely with those 2 stats, or those 2 tree choices that increase your offense from gear. Let's see, for the secondary primary, again, I just crit severity, or not crit severity, crit chance is fine. I guess it depends on what piece of gear you have. I mean, if you want to get the Onslaught Gloves of the Slicer, those are good for damage, and they're tedious to get, but they're not hard to get. And then you just put like a strength or constitution, whichever one you want to do there. Obviously, if you're doing strength stacking, you would want a strength mod, and you won't get the crit chance, which doesn't really matter that much. You just get all that extra free damage. For defensive gear, in the primary defense slot, I usually go with health, but health or defense are both useful. I mean, you do get constitution as a secondary stat, but having more health is always nice. I mean, you could just go with more defense because that also works really nice with the Wardicator setup. And then for the secondary, I always go with the health. I don't even remember what the other ones are. I mean, I guess you just get a bunch of stats, but I usually go with the 338 health and constitution or strength. Oh, by the way, secondaries just go with the Silver Champ recognition ones. I mean, they're only 15 each, which is really easy to get. For utility gear, it doesn't really matter if you go with cost discount or cooldown reduction. Both are fine. Both of them, I mean, you get really nice cost discount just from the strength tree. And you shouldn't have any energy issues. You really shouldn't need to use your energy builder too much once you hit 40 and start gearing yourself up and you have, your decent recovery, because Unstoppable gives you really good energy. I mean, Unleashed Rage has a really short cooldown. It's only like a minute. So I guess whichever one you prefer. If you want to be able to use Unleashed Rage more often, I would go with cooldown reduction. I would probably just go balanced. And then for the secondary, utility secondaries, I would go with the health one, again, the 338 health, and then constitution. And then for utility primary, I would stick in one of those ironclad ones if you want to. The ones that boost your heavy weapon damage, you might as well pick one of those, because like the other two choices you can go with. I mean, obviously if you have Force Law gear, you can pick the ironclad offense mod for heavy weapons and, cooldown or cost discount, whichever one you want. Or if you have one of those shitty Veterans Corps Might, you could stick that in there. I don't know why you'd want to do that, because they're rank 9 mods that are absolutely awful. I wouldn't recommend them. They're like 26 points in stats, which I would probably still go with cost discount or a cooldown reduction instead of that. And then an ironclad mod. Even a rank 5 one would be fine, because it's like 6% extra damage for your main attack, which is skewer, so it's not a bad choice. Hopefully this can fulfill your time-displaced gladiatorial needs. I think the hardest part of this character was trying to come up with a costume that looked about right. It'd probably be easier if you just didn't bother with the arm and leg wrappings or chose something else. There are some free pieces that look decent too. Not really any good shoulder pieces though that I think would work well with this, but whatever, close enough. You could just say that he was augmented by technology and stuff. Why not? I mean, it is a modern day setting game. That will totally work. Or, a futuristic techie thing. Or you just be like a magical gladiator. I mean, how else did he go through time? He has magic. There you go.